Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our second webinar here for using the ABFM PI credit tools on teaching physician. My name is Brian Hischier. I am SDFM's Manager of Online Education, and I help run Teaching Physician. If you've ever had communications with the website, you've probably interacted with me in one way or another. We're joined here today by Amanda Kost. She is our editor, and I will turn it over to her to say hello.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome everyone to our second session. So we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide. All right, so disclosures, we run Teaching Physician, so we can answer your questions about it. Our agenda today is we're going to do a little bit of welcome and webinar housekeeping. We'll review what we went over in session 1 in case you missed it. We'll talk a little bit about collection of pre-faculty development self-assessment data that your preceptors will need to do. And then we'll go through some steps to create a faculty development experience, including how to use teaching physician content to do so. We'll review what the ABFM requires of institutions while they're doing this. And then we'll go through some implementation considerations for the faculty development experiences, walk through 3 examples depending on what your learners need, and we'll go through homework and question and answer at the end. So we'll have you done in about an hour. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Brian to talk about webinar housekeeping.
Thanks. So the way we're going to do this is all of you attendees have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can use the Q&A box that Zoom provides. Those questions will come to Amanda and I. If you have something that you'd like to say or add to the chat box, you can do so as well. It's important to note that the chat functionality lets you target your statements and chats to the panelists or to the group as a whole. So make sure that you change that from panelists to all attendees if you want that to be something that would benefit everybody. Like Amanda said, we will have a Q&A at the end as we start going over more general questions. If you have specific questions about Teaching Physician as a website, feel free and drop those into the chat box and I can answer those there. I'll also make sure to put any links that you see in the presentation into the chat box too. All right, I'll pass it back over to Amanda.
All right, so we'd just like to get to know where people are coming from today. So if you are free, please just put your name and your institution into the chat so we can get to know where folks are from. All right, and maybe people are not at a place where they can use their chat or they're confused about the Zoom use of chat because I'm not seeing many people put their institutions in. Oh, wait, we've got someone from Campbell University. Welcome. Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine. I just needed to be a little bit more patient. Thank you for letting us know where you're coming from. All right, so the goals for the session today are to talk about how you can use Teaching Physician and its tools to collect pre-faculty development self-assessment data from your community faculty, from your preceptors. We're going to discuss using community faculty competencies to build faculty development experiences that support continuing certification and what the ABFM needs to do that. And then we'll discuss implementation considerations for high quality faculty development experiences, including 3 options for approaching different scenarios of faculty development need. So next slide. So we're going to kind of talk you through the start to finish. We reviewed these steps on our first webinar, but basically to offer this kind of performance and improvement continuing certification credit, there's several steps. And so what we talked about last time was the institutions need to register with the ABFM. They need to have record keeping, a portfolio manager, and they need to be able to track participation and completion of the preceptors. The community faculty need to be eligible for the performance improvement credit. So they need to attest that they teach. They need to teach 180 hours. A question came up last time, what time period is the 180 hours over? It's actually over the cycle of continuing certification, so it's over 3 years. So they need to do 180 teaching hours over 3 years. They need to participate in the intervention. In this case, the intervention is the faculty development experience that you're going to be offering them. They need to review pre and post data and collaborate as needed on the project. And then the other thing that they need to do that we talked about last time too is they need to perform a pre-assessment. We went through how you can have your community faculty do the teaching physician assessment, self-assessment today, and we'll look today to find out what some of those results look like. Next slide. Today, we're really going to focus on steps 4 and 5. So we're going to talk about how do you use teaching physician resources to design faculty development experiences that have a clear intervention and a specific aim for the development. And then we're going to talk about approaches to deliver the faculty development experience. And we're giving some ideas about how to do it live or also how to do it self-directed. Next slide. Our last webinar will occur in July, and we'll talk about these 2 final steps. So the final steps in this whole process are to complete a post-assessment, and you can use the teaching physician self-assessment tool. You can do an assessment yourself of the community faculty, and you can also use learner assessments. And we'll talk a little bit about how to think about those assessments today as you're designing and delivering your faculty development experience. And then finally, you need to notify the ABFM that you've completed the performance improvement activity and who's been a participant at your institution. So that's kind of a big picture, start to finish. So what we covered in session 1 was kind of an overview of ABFM performance improvement, or PI credit. We talked through the community faculty competencies, where they came from, what the domains are, and how to use them. And then we also walked through teaching physician tools. And that webinar was recorded and should be posted if you want to catch up from last sessions. We had some homework for attendees of the last session to prepare for this session today. So we asked attendees to register as an institution, to collect basic preceptor information, to have each preceptor complete the self-assessment tool, and then to start to think about potential faculty development areas from within the competencies. So to think about what are institutional needs that your school may have, what are some things that you know you need to work on development from either your clerkship, block, or course evaluations, and then looking at the preceptor self-assessments that they've done maybe in the past or more recently. What are some areas where we know, or you know, that your clinical faculty, that you know your preceptors might need some development? Next slide. So Brian's going to walk you through what it looks like to get self-assessment data from teaching physician, but we think that this is a really great tool because it does 2 things. So first of all, it helps you target your faculty development so that it's really high yield for your faculty, so that you are bringing them together or assigning or having them do self-directed work in a way that is actually beneficial to them, so that you're making it so that the faculty development is appropriate for the level of your learner, and will actually help them get to the next level of competency. The second reason we think it's so great is because it actually completes the first step, the data collection step of self-assessment, for you to be able to report to the ABFM. So you can use that self-assessment data to directly report to the ABFM that your preceptors have done that. So the way to do it is you can do it kind of 2 ways. You can request a identified PDF from community faculty that they can generate themselves, or you can use a snapshot of self-assessment data from teaching physician. And Brian's going to talk you through how to do both of these. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
All right, so what we see here on our screen is, on the right-hand side, we see 1 page of the report that's generated when a preceptor takes the self-assessment. So here, teacher and environment, you're going to see there's a description of this domain. Teacher and environment is one of the 5 domains that we cover. The selections that the preceptor made are represented here on this grid. You might remember from last time, we talked about how we're not trying to give a sort of stepwise level increase mentality here with this. So we don't have these labeled, but we do have this grid set up in such a way that you can reference this sort of before and after self-assessment. For instance, anyone who filled in column 1 is saying that they want to start at the very beginning of this particular topic. Anyone who's put a check mark into column 2 is at what we're calling level A. When they've placed a check here, you can see down here at the bottom, clinical team role is the short name for the competency. Because it was the first level chosen out of the 5, it was ranked highest in importance. So this appears here on the top of this report. It says exactly what the current competency level was stated at, start me at the beginning. It lets us know what the next competency is, recognizes the role of the clinical team in teaching, and it tells us what resource we're going to have them read. So you can look at this report. You'll notice that there is no preceptor name on here. It is absolutely anonymous. This PDF is something that, in order to identify themselves, they would change the file name to have their own first and last name in that self-assessment document. It's also permanent. So the link that is generated when they take this self-assessment can be bookmarked and accessed anytime over the next several years. So they can see a running history of their own development through these competencies. As far as accessing this information yourself, if someone has sent you a PDF, you don't need to sign into Teaching Physician to read it. It's not locked in any way. If someone sends you the link to their self-assessment, again, you don't need to sign into Teaching Physician to view that. So let's move on to the next slide. Imagine that you have had 54 community faculty go through this process. The only way that they can access the tool is to sign in using your institution credentials. So once they've signed in, they take the self-assessment, they generate their own report, and we anonymously store their selections in a database, all tagged to your institution's name. What you can see here is a representation of the report that's generated after those 54 users have taken the self-assessment. If we look at these columns, you can see we've organized them according to the 5 levels, start me at the beginning, level A, level B, and so on through D. We also have a very important column called marked as important. This is where a preceptor has self-selected that they themselves believe that this particular competency is important to them. So we've got the short names here on the left-hand side. You can see we have professional identity, had 6 people say, I don't know much about this. Start me at the beginning. At level B, there were 17 people, level C, 19 people, and so on. So these numbers are helpful to give you a good sense of like sort of taking the temperature of community faculty and how they feel about a certain competency. But seeing too that 20 people out of the 54 mark this as important might give you a little more impetus to provide some additional faculty development on that topic. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see that I've marked here in green and in red what was viewed as the highest importance amongst the sum total of community faculty and what was marked as the least important. In this case here, the preceptors at this institution looked at conflicts of interest as being the least important for them to learn about, whereas there was a two-way tie between well-being and evaluation. I've also noted which one sort of came into at third place here, which was learners in difficulty. Down here at the bottom, you can see a few sums, and you can use this in any way you like to start to develop your own priorities at your institution. So to get this report, you would want to email me at teachingphysician@stfm.org. The email address is down here at the bottom. It's also all over the website, so if you misplace it, you should be able to find it pretty easily. So that is our sample institutional self-assessment report. Amanda, did you want to say anything about this before I move on to the next slide?
Just that I think that this is a super helpful report to know kind of, again, taking the temperature or a snapshot of where your faculty are. And this is probably one of the most important tools that you have in terms of designing kind of a targeted, high impact, high yield faculty development experience. All right, so we can move on. Maybe, Brian, maybe what we should do is pause and see if there are any questions about the report.
Sure thing.
So if you have some questions, you can put them in the chat. You can raise hands, Q&A. We'll pause for just a minute or two. Maybe you were exceptionally clear about your description of the report and people don't have any questions about it. All right, well, if you have questions, please let us know. We're happy to answer them. So now we're going to pivot a little bit and just talk through some basic steps that everybody needs to consider when they're designing a faculty development experience. And then we'll talk about how you can use teaching physician resources and references and tools to implement each one of these steps. So in general, when you're designing a faculty development experience, you're going to need to go through 6 steps. First of all, you need to figure out what is the problem or need that you need to address. And the self-assessment is one way of knowing that. But you may know from your institution that there's just something that needs to be done in terms of faculty development. So there are common things that people need in general. Maybe people need to learn more about feedback. Maybe they need to learn more about grading, that sort of thing. So think about what your institution needs and also what you know from the self-assessment. The second step is to examine the particular needs of your learners. And this is where, again, the self-assessment document is really helpful, especially if you know that those faculty are going to attend your faculty development. You want to make sure that it's targeted to what they need and what level they're on and where they'd like to go and grow. The third step is to develop goals and measurable learning objectives. And we'll talk a little bit about this and how that aligns with what the ABFM wants in terms of institutional aims and interventions for the faculty development. You'll need to select an educational strategy that best fits your material. This can be either online, in-person sessions, it can be asynchronous, and we'll talk a little bit about 3 strategies that you could use depending on the particular needs of your learners once you look at their self-assessment. You'll need to think about the steps for implementation, and then you'll also need to think about evaluation and feedback of this session. And in this case, you'll also need to think about how are you going to have post-session evaluation or assessment of the attendees, because you'll need to be able to submit that to the ABFM for the performance improvement credit. Next slide. So what does the ABFM require? Well, in this case, they require a couple different things. One, they need an institutional aim and a clear intervention for the performance improvement credit. Now, remember, this is basically a QI project. So if this language looks a little bit familiar to you from QI methodology, it is. You'll need to write out what the aim of your faculty development experience is and what the intervention includes. And it can include a live session, self-directed reading, other sorts of things. You'll need pre and post data, and this is where the self-assessment tool can come in handy because you can have your faculty do it beforehand and then do it after. And then the other thing that you'll want to have people think about is what are their personal SMART goals or aims for individual faculty. So you may have an overall aim for your faculty development experience, but each person who's attending needs to develop their own goals. And again, this is in line with what is the quality improvement part of this intervention. And so what is that individual community faculty member going to do and is hoping to get out of and to achieve that they can prove at the end of their performance improvement project. And we'll talk a little bit about how to collect that. So next slide. So I'm using the word aims and SMART goals. I want to make sure that I'm being clear with what this language means. This is probably pretty familiar to most people, but I think it's good to review what they mean and also just be really clear about what the difference is between an institutional aim and a SMART goal and a personal aim. So an institutional aim really answers the question about what the faculty development session itself will accomplish. What are you hoping it's going to do for the institution or for the people that attend in terms of their teaching? So it has 3 components. One is that it needs to answer the question of how good is it going to be, for whom, and then by when. And so you'll need to write an aim that goes along with that, and you'll submit that in your documentation to ABFM because they ask specifically what is your aim. The second 2 things are things that your preceptors, things that your community faculty will do. So you can ask them to do one of these. I wouldn't necessarily make them do both. It kind of depends on if you're a SMART goal kind of person or a personal aim kind of person. I think either one of these strategies is fine. This is really how your preceptor is collaborating with you in the project. So a SMART goal is a framework for your community faculty to set personal goals that will align with the institutional aim that you have laid out for them. And a SMART goal just needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so once they've met the goal, or once they've articulated the goal, they should be able to look back 3 months later and say, oh yeah, I met that goal. Here's how I know I met it. And we'll talk about ways that they can also evaluate if they've achieved that goal. If they don't want to set a SMART goal, or SMART goals are not kind of your approach to doing quality improvement, you can also have them write a personal aim. So that answers the question about what the faculty member themselves is hoping that they're going to accomplish in their teaching after they've gone to the faculty development session. So it also has 3 components: how good, for whom, and by when. And we'll give examples of these in upcoming slides. So important to know the difference between these and how they work to support their performance improvement credit. All right, so we're going to go back to those 6 steps and just, again, talk through about how it fits together with the ABFM process and the teaching physician resources. So step 1, identify a problem or need that you need to solve. And a really great way to do this, like we said, is to look at those teaching physician self-assessments, to either look at them individually as PDFs or to look at the aggregate data that Brian shared with you. The second step is to identify or to examine the particular needs of your learner. So I recommend that you select a competency level or a domain that is going to meet the needs of your faculty. And we'll talk about 3 approaches to that. You need to develop goals and measurable learning objectives. So in this case, you need to determine an institutional aim. That really is your goal for the session. And then you need to write good learning objectives using Bloom's taxonomy and behaviorally based verbs. The 4th step, you need to choose educational strategies that best fit your material. So you can get material ideas from teaching physician pages. There's lots of resources, there's lots of background information. So you'll need to figure out what kinds of resources and materials you plan to use. And then you can also consider the 3 approaches I'm going to talk about later in this session. You'll need to devise steps for implementation. And so when you're thinking about implementing your faculty development experience, you need to ask yourself, who's going to come? What am I going to cover? When is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? And ask yourself, should it be synchronous where everybody meets, kind of like what we're doing today in a webinar, or can it be something that's self-directed and asynchronous? What works best for the material that you're delivering, the content that you're delivering, and also the needs of your preceptors. In terms of steps for implementation, you'll need to let your preceptors know that they will, at the end, have to set personal SMART goals or write a personal aim statement as part of the implementation of the project. And then you'll need to consider what kinds of evaluation and feedback you're going to get from the faculty development experience. So again, we talked about how you can use teaching physician self-assessment to get that post faculty development assessment of your community faculty. We'll talk about other kinds of feedback and self-reflection that can be from learners, from the faculty themselves. It can be from course evaluations. It can be from your personal evaluation of them. And then you also want to make sure that you have a mechanism to evaluate the session itself. How well did it go? Did it meet the goals of the community faculty that were attending it? So these are the 6 steps in how to use teaching physician and competency levels and SMART goals and personal aims to kind of make a session that's going to address the what's needed for the ABFM to support the performance improvement credit. So next slide. All right, so thinking about what do you need to develop a high quality faculty development experience? So first of all, again, you need a really clear institutional aim and learning objectives that go along with that. But then I think it's also really important to think about what are some things that are going to make your faculty say they were super glad that they went to your faculty development experience. Nobody wants to go to a faculty development experience and feel like they didn't learn anything or feel like they haven't been able to grow in some way. So I would encourage people to think about what are ways that you can use active learning in your faculty development experience. So, using things like peer shares, small group activities, role plays, actively using skills and materials that you provide in the training. If you need people to practice say one of your faculty development areas is on orienting the learner to the clinical environment, and you have an orientation tool, then you should have your preceptors, have your community faculty actually use that tool during the session so that they can practice the skills. You'll need to figure out what works for people. A live session, either in person, if it's safe to gather in person, or online can be really helpful. But sometimes people are busy and can't make time in their schedule to do that. So it's also fine to offer self-directed reading and activities and other modules to have people go through if you think you're going to capture more faculty attendance that way. And then remember, it's really important for the preceptors at the end of the faculty development to have their own SMART goals and aim statements, because this is what is also going to help them get the PI credit. Next slide. So we're going to walk through the process, but I want to stop right now and take any questions in the chat or raising hands. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. Again, if questions come up, please let us know. So let's walk through the process. So this is the report that Brian walked through before. And let's say that I received this about my community faculty, and I'm trying to figure out, what do I want to do? And I noticed that, again, the kind of highest level of importance that my community faculty are telling me that they care about are in well-being, and then also in evaluation. And then I noticed that, more people have rated themselves like start me at the beginning for the evaluation. And that seems to be an area of high need for my community faculty. So I'm going to use this to think about, how am I going to target my faculty and the different levels to create a development experience that will help promote their skills in evaluation. So next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk a little bit about how you can look and find teaching physician materials for this evaluation area.
Thanks, Amanda. So what we have on the screen here is a page that lists out every page referenced in the self-assessment report. I've put in the chat box a link to sort of the top level teaching physician page that contains all of these domains. So there are 5 domains. There are approximately, I can't even guess how many pages are included in all of these. But basically, if you go to the Learning Paths page, you can select a domain and then see all of the available pages here. For example, under Teacher and Assessment, we have Feedback, Formative Feedback, Summative, Bidirectional, and Evaluation. On the previous slide, we saw those numbers indicating which ones were had the most people requesting to start them at the beginning there. So you could click on one of these links, Formative and Summative Feedback, for instance, and find yourself in the appropriate page on Teaching Physician. What we see here is basic performance documentation on the left and timely summative, I can't see it, there's panels in my way, timely summative evaluations on the right. The way a teaching physician page is set up, you have the primary content at the very top, sort of a summarizing of what's most important for the preceptor to learn. It's followed by quick tips, which give a preceptor who is really needing to get started quickly on this the information they need. Down towards the bottom, you're going to see the references that were used to build this page. Those can be a great source for finding additional information. And then the authors of these pages have also added additional resources that you can use. So those are going to be over on the right-hand side of each page. Again, just in terms of ease of use, you'll notice that this page is within the evaluation section of Teaching Physician. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've listed out every page that's in the evaluation section, just to give you a good sense of the context of where this particular page sits within the overall topic itself. So Amanda, is there anything you wanted to say about these pages here?
I think I would just add that these are great starting points for references, resources, and basic material to start to build your faculty development session. So if I were one of you and I was building one and I wanted to talk about summative evaluations, I would go and I would read this page on timely summative evaluations. I would think about, how do I convey the material that's in the paragraph there? I would think about the quick tips. Oftentimes, the quick tips are going to be kind of behaviorally based, action-oriented things that the preceptor should do. So I would think about, what can I use for these quick tips? How could I get my preceptors demonstrating those skills or practicing those skills during their faculty development session? And then if I needed more information or more materials, I would look at the resources and the references to see, should I give my faculty some things to read beforehand, before they come to the session, to make sure that they're engaged in active learning and they're getting the most that they can out of the session. So this really is a lot of content and material that you can mine for an effective faculty development experience. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk through 3 scenarios for faculty development sessions that just come up frequently. And I want to talk about how you can design a session, and then also think about the competency levels and the teaching physician materials to support the development of the session. So the 3 scenarios that you might encounter when you're looking at self-assessments and looking at the report that you get is that maybe, for whatever reason, you have a lot of people that are kind of clustered around one competency level, and you just have a lot of faculty that want to get to the next level of competency. So you have kind of a very tight, targeted session, and you can focus on one topic. So that might be one scenario. I think that's a little bit less likely, but it might occur sometimes. The second, more likely scenario is that faculties are just at very different competency levels. They're just kind of spread across, as we saw in that spreadsheet, that people are saying, some people feel like they're level C, level D. Some people say, start me at the beginning. And how do you have differentiated instruction so that people come to your faculty development and don't feel like it's useless to them? And we'll talk through how you can do that. And then the third scenario is, maybe you're doing some faculty development at a new site or just with new faculty that you recruited for that year, and they're just new to teaching and they need the basics. They need to know what are the key things that they need to have knowledge about and have skills around in order to provide basic evaluation of a student when the student comes to be with them in their clinic. And so you might need to teach across a couple different domains. So we'll talk about that as an example too. So next slide. So here again, we're going to use the evaluation as an example, but this is part of the teacher and assessment domain. These are, again, the community faculty competencies. Levels A, B, C, and D go across the top, and then the individual rows are kind of the specific domain that the community faculty could work on. And we'll talk about how to design faculty development for one of these boxes, for one of the columns, and for one of the rows. So next slide. So we'll talk about scenario 1. Most faculty that you look at when you're looking at their self-assessment, they want to get to the next level of competency. You can point to one and say, this is where they need to go. I'm going to really focus my time on this. I want to make sure that everybody gets to the next level. So next slide. So let's say you look at your self-assessment data and you figure out that most people really want to get to this level, level B. They want to be able to provide the learner with both formative feedback and summative evaluation. And this is going to be the focus of your faculty development experience. So I'm going to talk through how you would approach this faculty development. So the first thing that I would do is I would review the corresponding teaching physician page for content and references. I would look to see, what does it say about this area, and what are some basic materials that I could use for my faculty development. I might read the references to get a little bit more information, and then I would also maybe look at other sorts of resources that are available. The next step would be to write an institutional aim statement. And in this case, because you're hoping that all the faculty that are attending are going to get to that next level, you're really going to focus it on that competency level. So remember, it needs to say how good, for whom, and by when. So my by when is in 3 months. 90%, that's so how good, 90% of them are going to be doing it. And for who, it's the faculty attending the development. We're hoping that in 3 months, 90% of the faculty that attend the development will be providing mid-clerkship formative feedback and submit timely summative feedback for students at their site. So this is a very clear aim statement. This is what you as an institution are hoping to accomplish with your faculty development experience. Once you have your aim statement, you can create a session that uses teaching physician content and references and resources to support achievement of this aim. So I would come up with 3 to 5 behavioral objectives using Bloom's taxonomy as a guide. And I would recommend that you do a mini didactic for your learners with teaching physician content and appropriate or relevant institutional content. And I would have the attendees practice using the formative and summative feedback forms from your institution so they feel like they know what they're doing. I might ask what are barriers to completing the forms, brainstorm ways to overcome those barriers, that sort of thing. And then once they've had some information, some knowledge building, some time to build skills using the feedback forms, then I would have each attendee think about what is their own SMART goal or personal aim statement that they have after attending the session that they're hoping in 3 months that they've achieved. And then you want to collect these. You want to know what your attendees are hoping to accomplish after going to the faculty development. After you've done it, you also need to create a plan to collect the data that evaluate if the faculty development met its aims. And the aims is plural here because remember, you have an institutional aim. You need to figure out, did the people that attended this provide mid-clerkship formative feedback and submit timely summative evaluations? So your data collection plan will be looking at, how many of them provided mid-clerkship formative feedback, how many of them got their summative feedback on time for the students at their site. You also want to think about the attendees' SMART goals and aims. And is there any data that you need to collect that helps them know if they have reached that goal? So let's say that one of your attendees had a SMART goal of making sure that they provide the mid-clerkship feedback at a certain period of time, right? Like with certain information that they've gathered from other people. Then you may need to help them figure out how are they going to collect data. Are they going to collect data from the students around how that mid-clerkship feedback went? Are you going to collect data from the students about how the mid-clerkship feedback went? If they want to know that they're providing appropriate and helpful feedback, how are you going to help them collect the data that shows whether or not they've achieved that goal? Now, this could get a little bit overwhelming. It might be that your faculty have drastically different aims. You don't need to make sure that you're collecting 50,000 different sources of data to help support everybody's aim. It's fine if your faculty come up with kind of an aim that's outside the scope of what you can do, to also just have them think about doing a self-reflection as a data source to decide if they've met their aims. So let's say that they come up with something and you just don't have the ability or bandwidth to collect the data. Having the faculty reflect on how did they do after receiving the faculty development and implementing the knowledge and skills that they got from the faculty development over those 3 months. How did it go with their next learners? What are some things that went well? What are some things that they are going to do differently? And how are they going to think about how they're giving feedback over the next few months? So this is a general approach for a faculty development session that really focuses on one specific level and getting all your faculty to that level. Next slide. So this is probably the more common scenario. And so you get your self-assessment data, you get the PDFs, and you notice that your faculty are just at very different competency levels. And you think to yourself, I don't want to do this 4 times. No one has time for that. How do I provide some faculty development that is useful for everybody? So next slide. So say that you have looked at the self-assessment data and you really notice, again, this is kind of the level, or this is the domain that people want to focus on, the difference between formative, feedback, summative evaluation, grounding their summative evaluation and formative feedback, really how are those things related? But you want to figure out how can you get learners at all levels? So next slide, I'm going to talk about an approach. So again, if this were me approaching this, I would go and I would review all the corresponding teaching physician pages for content and references, a great starting point for how you're going to build your session. I would then write an institutional aim statement. Again, this is going to be a little bit different because you're trying to get people to the next level. So in this case, the aim statement that I've written is around each faculty meeting their personal aim statement or SMART goal that demonstrate next level competency for student evaluation. So this is trying to make sure that everybody goes up a level essentially. I would then create a session using teaching physician content and references. I would have 3 to 5 behaviorally based objectives with Bloom's taxonomy. And then I have used this before in the past, and it's actually worked really well for community faculty. It's something called a jigsaw session. So this can be done in person, or it can also be done online, as long as you have the ability to sort people into breakout groups based on their domain level, based on their self-assessed level of competency and then mix them back together. So the way that it works is you take all your people that are a level C and you put them in a breakout room, all your people that are in level B, all the people that are in level A, and all the people that are starting off. And you have them discuss the behaviors that they use to demonstrate competency at that level. Now, your folks that are starting off, you might need to give them a little bit of a different type of task. You might have them reflect on some readings that they did ahead of time, or reflect on the teaching position page that they viewed ahead of time, and think about how they might incorporate that practice into their teaching. After you have the people that are you're essentially crowdsourcing what people are demonstrating at that level, and those folks have figured out, here's what we want to tell the people that are at the competency level below us. Then you'll sort people into mixed groups so that everybody gets some near peer teaching. So you'll have people in a group that start me at the beginning, level A, level B, level C, level D, and everybody from that group needs to share what are the key take-home points that their first group talked about, and then talk about, any pitfalls or barriers or, pearls that they have, so that they're having a discussion around how does everybody get to the next level. After you do that, you want to make sure that you do a mini didactics so that everybody gets the key take-home points. Now, probably most of the groups are going to teach at the level that you want to teach and help their peers get up to the next level appropriately, but they might leave out some really important content, or they might not know specifically what the institution needs to achieve this level. And so you want to then include a little bit of a mini didactic at the end to make sure that everybody gets the key take-home points. After people have attended the session, or at the conclusion of the session, they'll need to, again, write their own SMART goals and personal aim statements, and you will need to collect a plan or create a plan to collect data to evaluate if the faculty development met the aims of both your institutional aims and then personal aims. So next slide. So this is another common scenario, which is you just have some new faculty, they're new to teaching, and they need some basics. So in this case, next slide, instead of focusing on one of these domains, you're actually going to focus on level A for the entire teacher and assessment domain. You just want to make sure that your faculty have the basic information that they need to be able to be an effective teacher for your students. So in this case, you're going to look at the column and design your faculty development around this. Next slide. So again, these steps are going to look familiar. You're going to review the corresponding teaching position pages for the content and references that go along with these areas. You will write an institutional aim. And again, this one is going to be a little bit different again, that the faculty attending will be able to describe how they use the definitions of feedback and note-taking in their teaching. So I've used what was in those boxes to help write the aim. Same sort of thing, 3 to 5 behavioral objectives using Bloom's taxonomy. In this case, I would do 4 mini didactic sessions with teaching position and institutional content, and I would intersperse these with breakout small group discussions or skill practice based on what I had just presented. So I would have attendees go back and forth. Same sort of thing as before. At the end, each attendee needs to write a goal or personal aim statement, and you'll need to collect these. And then you'll need to think about a plan to collect data that evaluate if the faculty development met the aims that you had and the personal aims that the attendees came up with. Next slide. So this covers 3 approaches that will address most faculty development needs at an institution using competency-based faculty. If you were along the ride for the webinar and doing this in real time, your homework in order to be able to make sure that your faculty get their faculty development by the summer and get their performance improvement credit by the summer is to identify the specific topic that you're going to do at your own institution, to write an institutional aim, to design and deploy your faculty development using teaching physician and institutional content, have the faculty articulate SMART goals and aim statements, plan about how you're going to evaluate if you reach these aims, how will you gather assessments from learners, is the assessment from learners included in your evaluation form, or do you need a different survey method? How will you gather feedback from your faculty and their progress about their SMART goals and aim statements? What kinds of data do you need to prove that they've had performance improvement in this area? So this is your homework for the next session. So with that, we are done a few minutes early, and we will take time for questions. What questions do everybody have about what we've described today? I'm not seeing any questions. If people have questions, again, feel free to email either of us. Brian is probably a little bit easier to reach and he knows where to find me, but we're happy to answer any questions. We really appreciate you all coming to our webinar today. And we look forward to seeing everyone. We're going to meet again in 3 months. Hopefully between now and 3 months, you will have figured out what you're going to do for your faculty development, implemented your experience, thought about how you're going to collect the post-assessment data. And in the 3-month time period, we'll talk about how you submit that to the ABFM so that all of your teaching physicians can get their performance improvement credit. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Hope you have a great, oh wait, there's a new message. Oh, that's just Brian within his email address. Thank you, Brian. I hope everyone has a really great day and that we'll see you again in July.